I don't want to disrupt the order of things and time, but I'm going to go ahead and start the session. And because Congressman McCaul already knows the history,
Yeah, that's right. Okay. I am not Congressman McCaul. All right. Everyone, my name is, most of you should know me, I'm Will Bowden. I'm a professor here at UT and also the executive director of the Clements Center, one of your sponsoring organizations for today. So it's my honor to be introducing our three guests for this panel. And one thing, I'm a native Arizonan. I've been in Texas 6 years, but I can now certainly consider myself a proud citizen of this state. And one of the great things about being in Texas is coming to understand the great heritage our state has on national security. Not only do we have three very distinguished experts you're going to be hearing from here, but they're all native Texans. And that's part of a very long heritage Texas has of leaders in armed services and intelligence, diplomacy in Congress, at the State Department, CIA, et cetera. So we could do a whole conference just on that. Very brief introductions. You can get the full bios for these gentlemen in your conference materials. First over here we've got Chairman Mike Conaway, Chairman of the House Ag Committee. Please do not be lobbying him on cotton subsidies today. He's here to talk to us about intelligence and national security. He's also here, therefore, in his capacity as a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and a member of the House Armed Services Committee. In between next to him there, we have Chairman Michael McCaul, who is known to many of us here as who are his constituents in his district. For our purposes, he's the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, also in the House, and he is also the author of Failures of Imagination, a great new book on the terrorist threat. So I highly commend it to you. It's available on Amazon. So
thanks for the plug.
Okay, absolutely. So, and finally, we have here Admiral Bob Inman. Again, an icon here in these parts, but also an icon in the fields of intelligence and national security, former director of the National Security Agency, deputy director of CIA, and the godfather of the Strauss Center, the Clements Center, the Intelligence Project, and everything that brings us here today. So we're going to turn it over to them. Please join me in giving them a warm UT welcome.
Thank you. Michael, I'd already announced I'm going to do a quick history of where things started. And my source for this history is the late President Gerald Ford, who took me through the chapter and verse. Post-World War II, when we were having vibrant intelligence activities that the country had not had in the past, oversight from the Congress consisted of 8 members of Congress. The Speaker and minority leader, the top 2 leaders in the Senate, and the 2 leaders of the Appropriations Committee. Those 8 met on rare occasions with the Director of Central Intelligence. That's where they decided on budgets, which was the principal thing they discussed. That's where they got briefed about what was going on in the outside world they ought to know. The House Armed Services Committee looked for a way to sort of carve out a small area of responsibility, and a congressman from Michigan, Mr. Nedzi, was the chairman of that subcommittee, but they rarely met. And suddenly Seymour Hersh began publishing a series of articles in late '74, characterizing some real and some imagined abuses from the U.S. intelligence community for the previous 25 years. And there was, as we often see, a media frenzy that followed. And it didn't take long for Mr. Nedzi to get chopped up pretty badly in a hearing. The chairman of the House Appropriations Committee was Mr. George Mahon from the Lubbock. He wasn't going to get caught the same way Mr. Nedzi did. So he announced to the executive branch that the House Appropriations Committee was going to hold classified hearings to look at every intelligence program. And I got the challenge as a new director of Naval Intelligence and head of the National Weather Reconnaissance Office to go with the Undersecretary of the Navy to brief for the first time members of Congress on submarine reconnaissance programs, underwater activity, the whole gamut. Things that we had considered so sensitive, we shared it with very few, even in the executive branch. There was never a leak from that meeting. And one of the important things Mr. Mahon established, you can reveal your most sensitive detail when the chairman is in solid control of security and not have leaks. But going parallel while he was holding his committees, Church Committee and Pike Committee, Senate and House, very different committees in its membership and in the staffs, but there was a steady stream of information to feed the media appetite. And we came out of it with a sense that the intelligence community had been spying on U.S. citizens. Tom Charles Houston was a member of the Nixon staff. They were absolutely persuaded that the anti-Vietnam War demonstrators were being paid for by the Soviets, money flowing through Cuba. That's what they were looking for at Watergate in the process. So they sat out in this search everywhere to find any evidence that would support these basic theories. There was no evidence, but that was beside the point for the thrust of where it took them. The result after Church and Pike finished was the Congress decided to create permanent oversight committees. They'd tried permanent oversight committees earlier for one other area, atomic energy, Joint Atomic Energy Committee, members from both House and Senate. Neither body liked it. They decided never to repeat that again. So the lead started in the Senate. Senator Daniel Inouye from Hawaii was going to be the first chairman. And he came to the Pentagon to visit with three of us to say, what do we have to do to ensure you tell us what's going on, that we don't have to ask the right question in Senator Howard Baker's version of Watergate. You'll tell us what we need to know instead of our having to pry it out. Answer was two things: security, that we can trust, that we can share our deepest secrets and we won't be reading about it in the media and losing sources. And second, to the degree that it's humanly possible, never take a vote on party lines. Always have at least one member of the other side for the vote. Senator went back. He got Senator Goldwater to line up to be the minority leader as they put together the committee. But they made an exception. He was the vice chairman, not the ranking minority. And all the staff belonged to the chairman and the vice chairman. We weren't very far into the committee's existence when Senator Gary Hart sent for his designee to help write a press release. I went up to the staff director, who went to see the chairman, who fired the staffer. And Senator Hart went running down saying, "You can't do that." Senator Inouye said, "I just did, and it stuck." And the discipline on that staff was as good as I ever saw in the executive branch. While that survived, Senator Inouye only wanted to do 1 2-year term. He turned it over to Senator Birch Bayh, who did a comparable good job, but lost his seat. Republicans took over, and then it was Senator Goldwater and Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Couldn't find two more different people, but they came together to collaborate very effectively. The only downside I found, I never went to see the two of them at 6 o'clock in the evening because I couldn't keep up with them as they were enjoying. I'd go see them at noontime. Oversight worked. House started a little more slowly, but they were fortunate. The chairman, Eddie Boland, was a roommate of the speaker, Tip O'Neill. So you suddenly have two committees with slightly different jurisdiction. House Permanent Select Committee authorizes, and it goes to the Appropriations Subcommittee, Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, for approval. On the Senate side, the Senate Select Committee authorizes, but the Senate Armed Services Committee gets to review and vote on it, and then it goes to the counterpart appropriations. So picture I've tried to paint for you up to the simple time when, before 9/11, where you had oversight provided by 2 permanent select committees, 2 appropriations committees, and the Senate Armed Services Committee sort of peering over the shoulder. After 9/11, Department of Homeland Security, Homeland Security Committee, along the way the judiciary committees on both bodies had also gotten a run. So suddenly, instead of being fairly compact and small, it begins to expand. That's old history. My observation was so much depended on the personalities of the chairman and ranking minority member, how well they worked together, how intensely interested they were, when this process worked remarkably well and when it didn't. Why was I so enthusiastic about helping get it structured and work with it? The reality that the media can never be the public's representative on intelligence sources and methods. So you needed an oversight process who became, in fact, the surrogates for the public at large, knowing what was happening. Not always a happy mix, particularly where the media was concerned. But there are periods when I would assert that it worked extraordinarily well. And now, may I turn to my 2 colleagues here, 2 different points. Chairman Conaway, if I can start with you to talk about how the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence works from your perspective. And then, Michael, I'm going to turn to you for the Homeland Security and how it interacts on these issues.
Well, thanks, Admiral. Appreciate it. It's great to be with all of you. Admiral mentioned one important point, and that is that the House Select Committee on Intelligence is both an oversight committee, watching what the IC does, but we're also the authorizing committee. And that is a big difference because it gives us a bit of a stick with respect to the committees. Any executive branch agency, it's more straightforward for Congress to slow them down or stop what they do. It's really difficult to force them to do something, to hit the gas, to go faster than they really want to, because
when you got the purse strings.
Power of the purse. That's exactly right. And so, but in the role, very much like the Admiral said, personality at the top matters. And it's not only the personality of the chairman and the ranking member, because I've been on the committee since '09. I've only been on there under President Obama, so I don't know, and I'm a Republican for fair disclosure. And quite frankly, that's irrelevant with respect to the Intelligence Committee, but I've only been there while he's been president, so I don't have any juxtaposition with President Bush and how the oversight worked there. My first chairman and ranking member didn't get along at all, and it was pretty dysfunctional. We didn't do a great deal. It was kind of perfunctory. By extension, the agencies themselves didn't trust that leadership. And so they weren't particularly forthcoming. The Admiral mentioned that the idea was for them to tell us what we needed to know. Well, that was no longer the case. We had to ask the right question. And if we didn't ask the right question, then obviously we didn't want to know what was what we needed to know. And so that went forward. We then had a period with Mike Rogers and Dutch Ruppersberger. And those 2 fellows got along swimmingly well. They were shoulder to shoulder on all the issues. There weren't any partisan issues that made it inside. Once the door shut, the partisan the jerseys dropped. And we had great work there. The new set with Devin Nunes and Adam Schiff is working. It's still early. This is his first year. They're into their second year working together, but that's working as well. But the real issue is how well does those 2 leaders then get along with the leadership of the NSA, CIA, GRO, and all the other 17 agencies that are out there. House Select Committee also has oversight over the NIP, the National Intelligence Program, as well as the Military Intelligence Program. And I don't think the Senate group has that exact same thing. We also have 2 of the appropriators, 3 of the appropriators, 2 on the majority, 1 on the minority, sit in any of the briefings that we get. And it's their choice. If they want to come down and listen to what we're hearing, the advantage to that is that you've got the same story being told in both places. You don't have that opportunity for them to come tell us something as an authorizer, and then they go tell the folks who really have the purse strings, the appropriators, a different story. And then the role that members play, we have the deep responsibility to make sure there are no leaks coming from our team as we get this sensitive information. We go through a process when other members, by the way, The speaker and the minority leader appoint specifically, hence the term select, the members. It's not done by the steering committee. It's not a popularity contest. These are positions of trust. And quite frankly, on the House side, it is the most coveted committee to serve on. There are probably 50 or 60 members who, on the Republican side, who bang away at the speaker to get one of these 12 slots that we have. And so we are also the keeper of who else gets to come in and listen. If we have a member who wants to see something specific that's classified, then we will vote. And we have voted on a couple occasions to not allow another member access to the information because based on our experience with that member and other arenas, we just don't trust them. And so that is that responsibility, it falls to us as well. And then the last thing is that we had the conversation this morning about 215 and 702 and a variety of opinions on that. But the stunning amount of misinformation associated with both of those as a result of the intentional misinformation that the media and Fox and the talking heads on talk radio and all those folks continue to this day misstate what those programs do, makes it incumbent upon us on the committee to be that defender of sometimes things that are hard to defend. And that is looking your constituents in the eye who've heard all this stuff on Fox or on the internet. They know it's the truth because that's their trusted source. And to look them in the eye and say, those guys are wrong. Here's what's actually happening. If you can actually say that. In some instances, you just have to say, that's not what happened. I can't tell you what happened, but that's not what happened. So it's a great role to have to be a part of that, but it is personality driven. And as the agency heads churn, that's got to be reset every single time. As we go into a new administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, there will be a churn again with the appointed leadership as well as the professionals that are there. And that presents a gap of trust because, as I was mentioning to somebody earlier, before you trust somebody, you have to know them. You have to build that relationship. And unless you've done that, then you automatically distrust them. I see world as a world of distrust. And so you just automatically got to, so as we change administrations, then there will be a period in there where those relationships have got to be rebuilt and reestablished or established so that we can do our job because you don't want it to be, well, Conaway, you didn't ask the right question, so we didn't tell you the critical issue there. We just wait on you to rely on your intelligence or intuitiveness to be able to ask that question. So anyway, great to be with you. Be happy to answer questions when it gets to it.
Thank you. Chairman McCaul.
Well, let me first say that Mike Conaway and I had the distinct pleasure to serve on the Ethics Committee for about 6 years, so there was no shortage of business on that committee in the Congress. And then Michael went on to serve as the chairman of the Ethics Committee, so I applaud
I was
you
a
for
really
that.
bad guy. I made the speaker.
Talk
something
about
really
public,
wrong.
Really bad.
talk about public service, both for serving on the Ethics Committee, but also you're not doing things for your constituents. Here you're doing what you believe is the right thing for the country.
And sort of like the HIPSI, we operated in secrecy most of the time on ethics, and nobody knew what we did, and they cared what we did, but we didn't get a lot of credit probably at the end of the day. But having said that, to my great friend and mentor, the Admiral, it's been a real honor to be a friend of yours for so many years.
Thank you.
Back to when I was Deputy Attorney General, and then Chief of Counterterrorism in the U.S. Attorney's Office here. Failures of Imagination, the book. This is a man who coined the phrase, failures of imagination, that I chose to name, but also the 9/11 Commission, more importantly, coined that phrase as one of the reasons for 9/11 and why 9/11 occurred. And so when I first got elected to Congress, I talked to the Admiral to get his advice on committee assignments, and he said, well, there's going to be this new committee that's really a result of 9/11. It's the Homeland Security Committee. And so I took his advice and signed up, and little did I know I'd be the full committee chairman on a relatively fast track, but it's been a passion of mine back to my prosecutor days. It's a challenge, and I think as Mike mentioned, it's the personalities do count. I try to, like HIPSI, we maintain classified information. We have a SCIF, classified briefing room in the Capitol. I get briefed routinely by the FBI, NCTC, Homeland Security and the intelligence community that come in to brief me on the status of the threats. Intelligence looks a great deal overseas. We look at the homeland, but in looking at the homeland, you have to look at the threats that are overseas. Like ISIS, when we started to get briefed on that maybe 3 years ago, and it wasn't made public that there was this offshoot of AQI that now had morphed into what we all know is one of the deadliest threats to the homeland today, and responsible for Paris and Brussels and in Turkey. Now there's a really huge threat involving the evacuation of family members of service members and diplomats. But it's a constant challenge to identify those threats and make sure Homeland Security is about travel and people and bad things and keeping them outside of the United States, whether it be TSA and the oversight we do of TSA to the border, to make sure our border is secure, or at least we're trying to secure it. There is an intelligence piece within DHS that coordinates with the IC, and they brief us periodically. And the oversight is important, and I have a very good relationship with the Secretary, Jay Johnson. Don't always agree with him on everything, but we really kind of see eye to eye on the major threats. We work together in trying to fix things. And finally, the cybersecurity piece is something that HIPC works very well with my committee in crafting really the biggest, probably landmark piece of cybersecurity legislation ever passed by the Congress. Y'all heard Lisa Monaco talk about the CTIC, the Cyber Threat Integration Center. That was part of the authorization, in addition to an information sharing bill that enables the federal government through all of its components to share with the private sector, private back to the federal government, and then private to private with liability protections. We believe that this will go a long ways to protecting our critical infrastructures from a cyber-based attack, whether it be a nation state or espionage, as we saw with OPM, or just the theft of intellectual property. But going back to the relationships, it is important, particularly in my committee, which sometimes jurisdiction is an issue, to be able to work with the members of the House Intelligence Committee, as we did so smoothly on that bill to get good things done. And of course, I think this is one of those great moments that's rare, where the House and Senate agreed, and so did the White House and the President. We were able to sign that into law. And so, but whether it's legislation authorizing certain components, but I think the oversight as well, holding them accountable. Now that we've authorized this cyber role, we have oversight hearings on that. We have border security hearings, TSA, with what they're doing, with all the airlines are still the crown jewel of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and ISIS. And I will say, I think just Mike and I talk on the floor a lot. It's great to have a member that has the capacity to want to learn this and has a passion for it, and really wants just, at the end of the day, to do something good for the American people. And I think ultimately that's why we serve.
We could have a great conversation here for the next half hour, but to give you all the opportunity, we've got about half an hour. So I'd ask, please keep your question fairly brief, identify who you are, and whoever wants to get us started. And the microphones hopefully are ready. I've got right here in front, start.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Kelly. I run a national security publication online called the Cypher Brief. And I hope you both stick around for the next panel, because I might try to pull you into that one too, where we talk about the media's responsibilities in this, which is a great subject. But one of the things I've always wondered, covering this for a while as a journalist, was everybody wants to know what goes on in those secret briefings, which obviously you can't tell us. But nobody ever walks out of there like hair on fire screaming either. So what is your sense of your responsibility as members of Congress to, I guess, not warn the American people, but to help set the agenda so the media is not the only place where people go to understand how immediate the threat is, let's say. What is your sense of giving the American people a level of how much they should be worried and what they should be worried about? Are our priorities in the right place?
Well, I think we have, we are elected by the people. We're held accountable by the people, and we need to, we're spokesmen. I mean, we do talk to the people. But I would advocate, and I think Mike does this very well, we have a responsibility in our rhetoric. When I go on television, I try to be responsible in what I say and not scare everybody to death. And there are briefings where most of them are updates, but there are occasionally you get briefed on various plots and threats that have never come to light that are very concerning. But you have to compartmentalize that in your own head, which is a challenge at times when you're dealing with the media, having to compartmentalize. Everybody in the room that's been in the IC knows how to compartmentalize, but you do that in your office, not on national TV. And that's something that even the secretary tells me is difficult for him, and I know FBI director. But I think we need to be responsible in the rhetoric. Doesn't always happen.
I think most of what goes on is more strategic and vision kind of thing, trying to see where it might be coming from. From time to time, there'll be actionable intelligence that law enforcement, we're talking about the threats here within the United States that are going on. I tell the folks in District 11, look, there are 330 million of us in this country. The odds of you being caught up in any terrorist event are pretty darn remote. But get on about your business and get after it. But if you're at the finish line at Boston Marathon, or you went to work one day at San Bernardino, it's a big deal to get caught up in it. See, there's a blend on the balance, pretty way remote that any of us will be directly affected by something in that regard. And so we don't need to be unduly fearful. We just have to be, you see something, say something, and be on the watch. But you got to get about if we allow it to take us over, then they win, and we just simply can't let terrorists win in that regard. So it just trust that there are a few folks that are looking at it every day. Most of them are in the executive branch. They feed their families, getting up early in the morning, going to bed late at night, losing sleep over all these kinds of things. And you've got good people that want to get between you and those bad guys. And just know from that standpoint that we've got a good system in place, and it's been working really well. Again, as was said by Lisa, the bad guys have to be right once. They got to be right every single day.
Suzanne, my sense, the intelligence community is pretty good on nation threats. What's happening, where they're headed, what they're looking at. It's when you turn to narcotics and particularly terrorism, targets that are extraordinarily hard to penetrate by humans because they shoot first if they're suspicious. And is it a lone wolf or is it a harder one? So my sense is it's a much tougher job to alert and inform the public if it's narcotics dealer or terrorism in the process. For threats from other countries, select the time to tell you. If you listen to our television star here on occasion, you get a pretty good feel of what other countries are doing in cybersecurity threat at all. So I would grade that it's a much tougher job first to know and to inform if it's the single individual terrorist or a handful that you're dealing with. How do you warn or not warn? There was a hand back up. Comes the microphone.
I'm Ron Nicholas. My question is very brief. What is the future of a border wall in relation to intelligence and security?
Yeah, Mike is in West Texas. And he's been down the border a lot. Look, my personal, and I passed a bill out of my committee. We have, under the Secure Fence Act, I think about 50 more miles that needs to be completed. It's a static thing. It slows things down. If you go down there, the ranchers will tell you they can cut through it and dig under it. And
Exactly.
so, my view is let's think in the modern age of technology. I just got a briefing with some UAV stuff that we have just yesterday. I mean, I think the aviation assets that we brought back from Afghanistan theater war, aerostats to Predators to these smaller UAVs, I think what we need down there is 100% visibility from the sky to see what's happening on the ground. Just like any threat, you have to see it and know where it's coming to be able to stop it effectively. And so in my bill, we call for 100% visibility, which we can achieve. We can achieve that. And, but the idea, I may get myself in trouble here with who could be our next nominee, but I don't think a 2,000-mile wall is going to solve the problem, number one, and it's very costly. And I think our taxpayer dollars can be used more effectively using technology and our resources on the ground.
Back in 2006, when that secure fence thing was passed, I think I may be the only Republican who voted against it. And I represent Middle Odessa and San Angelo, so I understand the drill. But at the time, it was done as an overreaction to losing that election, quite frankly. Nobody asked where it was going to go. Nobody asked how much it was going to cost. Nobody talked to the people that be involved. Nobody talked to the landowners who were going to lose their land. It was just an over the weekend reaction. Let's build 700 miles. Well, should it have been 800? Should it have been 600? None of those questions got asked during that whole deliberation. So I voted no, and I've been able to hang on to my seat in spite of that since 2006. And so this whole rhetoric that's currently going on by Mr. Trump is, in my view, it's misplaced. We need the right assets at the right time, all the time, to gain operational control. And that means as we see the threats, we've got helicopters or other access to be able to interdict. Texas has got a river, and we like our river between us and Mexico. If Mr. Trump would say he wanted to build that wall on the Mexican side of the river and make them pay for it, then that might be okay. But if we built a wall in Texas, we give our river away. We've given away a golf course in South Texas, where we've got the wall inside that golf course, basically created a no man's land on part of U.S. sovereign territory. You've got farmers and ranchers all up and down the Rio Grande who've lost sovereign access to the river as a result of infrastructure that might or might not be the right response. Yes, in the urban areas, you're going to have physical walls and barriers and other kinds of things. But in the wide open plains of West Texas, Big Bend, that's not the right asset for the job. You get the wrong asset for the job. So I think hopefully cooler heads will prevail as we go forward. But Mike's bill is exactly right. He went to each sector from Brownsville all the way to San Diego and said, what do you need for this sector? How many people, how many helicopters, sensors, cameras, what do you need to control? And put that in that bill. And we were spring-loaded, ready to go with that in January of 15, and most of us are pretty excited about it, but we had some pushback out of the Senate because it didn't deal with the internal enforcement issues, which are outside Mike's committee's control. And so it's still ready to go. He's done a great job with making that happen. It would get that step toward operational control in a thoughtful, yes, cost-efficient manner that is far better than just thumping your chest and bragging about how tall you can build something.
And in the reality, the evidence is there that where the wall has been built, they either tunnel underneath it or go over it. So the whole illusion that a wall would give you security is an absolute non-starter. It's the 100% surveillance of the area that offers you an opportunity. Next question. Microphone right behind you, Paul.
Full disclosure, I'm a serving CIA officer assigned here as a teacher. And I wanted to ask a question sort of on behalf of my students, particularly of you on the HIPSI, Mr. Conaway. You said something, you kind of skipped over something pretty quickly that I wanted to come back to. You
Darn,
said,
you caught me.
Well, you were talking about the purse strings, and a lot of times when you think of purse strings, people think of sort of holding people back, and you said something about putting your foot on the accelerator. So when my students ask me questions about oversight, they tend to be thinking about sort of the church Pike Committee days of us doing wrong things, whereas my interaction with oversight, which is frequent, is why aren't you going faster? What do you need more of? What are your challenges? How much time do you spend keeping us, in a box and making sure we're not out of line, and how much trying to help us or make us do our job better?
It's more of the latter, quite frankly. And we have legitimate disagreements with the administration on things that might be done in certain parts of the world. But by and large, we all want the team to have the resources necessary to get it done. And there's not one of us who wouldn't vote for greater resources allocated to this initiative. We're also, I didn't mention earlier, we're in a kind of a transition from a fight that was basically find, fix, and finish bad guys, radical Islamists. We've had other hard targets emerge, Russia, China, other things are going on in the world, and the team has got to reset because we've got an awful lot of officers who've come onto the team, and that's all they've done. And we've got to spread that out. We've got to retrain. The CIA and our NSA both have monster reorganizations going on. It's at a point in time they're not going to get finished before the new administration puts new people in place. And so there's some risks associated. But most of what we're doing is trying to figure out how we could get more resources and fighting off, in some instances, our colleagues on the Senate side who want to put resources someplace that we don't think is effective. The IC doesn't want it, so it's an argument between the House and Senate as to where to put these monies, and the Senate may want one thing, we want something else, and so you'll see those tug of wars going on, but it's more the latter. From time to time, we'll come across circumstances where we do disagree with what the president's trying to get done, and there you'll see us begin to try to put fences around certain monies till certain things happen, that kind of thing, but it's more the latter. Thank you for your service and your team. I serve on the Armed Services Committee, and all of us brag on our young men and women in uniform. We got two of them up here at the top up here, great warriors at their core. The clandestine service and others who have served in total anonymity, I became aware of them in a fulsome way when I got on the committee, and I'm stunned at the dedication to the cause and to the sacrifices to this country that you and others make on their behalf, and you labor in anonymity. The only time anybody ever know anything that you've done is if you get it wrong, and bad guys win. All the rest of the time, sometimes even your colleagues don't know the good stuff that you've done, but thank you for that.
Question from a student. We got about 3 of them here. Let's pursue.
I'm Jake Barnett. I'm an undergraduate fellow at the Clements Center. Thank you very much, Congressman, for being here. So one thing that Lisa Monaco brought up at lunch is that as a result of geography and history and demographics, Europe faces a very different threat from radical terrorism and specifically from refugees than the United States. And yet a lot of pundits in this country have used the Paris or Brussels attack as justification to block letting in 20,000 relatively carefully vetted refugees from Syria. And I'm wondering whether it's in HPSI or the House Committee on Homeland Security, what does the debate look like between allowing in refugees who are in need of help and the threat posed by terrorism?
Well, I was on the leaders' National Security Task Force, and we did the visa waiver program security bill, which I thought was vitally important. If I could back up and define the threat as I see it, and in large part, going back to bin Laden, sort of caves and couriers, very primitive. Couriers led us to that. But now we have a new generation of terrorists that are very savvy on the internet, can exploit it and turn it against us. And that has become a tool of recruitment for them. They've recruited 40,000 foreign fighters in the region, Iraq and Syria. Out of that number, about 6,000 have Western passports, which is why we're concerned about the travel dynamics of visa. And then thousands have returned to Europe, which is what they're facing right now. Aboud, the Paris leader, mastermind, claims he brought 90 foreign fighters into Europe with him. France has identified about 20 of these guys, but there are thousands there. That is the greater threat to Europe. In addition to their laws are outdated, they're in a pre-9/11 state. They don't share the intelligence as well as we do, or the database. They don't screen past watch list EU citizens. Contrast the United States, we've had hundreds of foreign fighters. Some have returned. Still a threat, but not as great as I think it is in Europe. Same thing with the refugees. I mean, they've had, I think 500,000 flee into Europe, and it's causing great stress on Europe. And in Europe, they're not as assimilated, I think, as well as we are in the United States. People say round up Muslims in the United States. I say in Europe, they're very segregated, and they have their diasporas, and they're radicalizing. Different situation here in the United States. Then to the point of the Syrian refugee. And I know it's an emotional issue, but I had the director of the FBI testify before my committee, along with the Secretary of Homeland Security, tell me that they did not have the proper vetting process in place, that they didn't have databases on these individuals, because in Syria, we don't have very good intelligence, quite frankly. We had to pull out completely out of Syria. So they were essentially warning me. And then when you look at ISIS's own words, they say we want to exploit the refugee program to infiltrate the West. We know in the Iraq refugee program that there were mistakes made, and even with the intelligence we had there. So our bill that we passed actually in a bipartisan way by a very large number in the House simply called for a pause on the program until proper vetting could be put in place, as warned to us by the Director of FBI and Secretary of Homeland Security. And that it be certified at these high levels that they're not a threat to national security. That bill did not make it through the Senate. And as a result, the refugees are coming in. And there are about 10,000 of them. Once they're in, we don't have the ability to monitor them. I agree. I think most, and I've seen the camps in Jordan and Turkey, I think most of them are Sunni Arabs fleeing Assad and ISIS. And there are women and children. But there are some military-age males that would concern me. And my first responsibility is to protect the American people, not bring in threats unless they've received proper vetting. I hope that explains it somewhat. I don't know if, Mike, you want to...
It's been a civil war going on in Syria for 5 years now, so the public records available for who the bad guys are don't exist, and so it's going to be, I think there are better responses. I think the U.S. does have a role in helping Europe fund response to the refugee program. I think the U.S. has a responsibility to help try to create a safe zone. There's some solutions that would be involved keeping folks in Europe and in the area that we could be financially helpful on as a part of our response, but premature to start bringing a lot of folks in.
We had another student hand up here.
Hello, I wanted to ask, so about the UAVs, even after Homeland Security said that they weren't effective enough and the GAO said the same, why do you continue supporting UAVs, even though local communities don't seem to accept it and port commissioners don't seem to need them and they're extremely expensive? Do you think that the fact that General Atomics gives money to the Homeland Security community?
I think the whole question is really, forgive me, totally off base.
Well,
The UAVs, in fact, are effective, and most of the publicity that you're reading is, in fact, inaccurate.
well, I read
So
it
the
from my
whole
GAO
question,
report.
as you've proposed it thus far, is based almost entirely on inaccurate information. Okay. Next question. I'm almost 85, and you'll understand it in my response to questions.
My question is mainly for Chairman McCaul. So you were successful in passing the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, and that was several years in the making, and a large part of the original opposition to that bill had to do with some of the privacy concerns. And you were able to build consensus and pass legislation on this important emerging issue, and now you're endeavoring into that same field with the going dark debate and the encryption commission that you're proposing with Senator Warner. So I'm curious as to what are some of the lessons learned that you've come away with on how we can regain some of the public trust that's so vital for conducting intelligence and national security work, some of which had been lost with the unauthorized disclosures.
Thanks for that question. We had about 300 meetings with all the stakeholders on the cyber piece, and including the privacy advocates. I think they were impressed by the fact, well, what they wanted was a lead civilian agency as the sort of the portal to the private sector rather than a military organization. I would say in the event of a cyber warfare attack, the military is going to stand up and defend the nation. We're just talking about here about information sharing to protect critical infrastructures, the malicious codes, so they know how to protect from an intrusion. And so we got buy-in, quite frankly, because of that fact. And Homeland Security Department does have an Office of Civil Liberty and Privacy that I think factored greatly into that as well. On the encryption issue, and it came up today at lunch, I see this as one of the greatest challenges to federal law enforcement. When you look at the Paris attackers using Telegram, end-to-end encryption, they asked, why didn't you see Paris coming? We couldn't see it because we couldn't see their communications. I would predict the same, we're going to find out the same thing in the Brussels attack. And what I don't want to see is a Paris or Belgium style attack in the United States where encryption is used and exploited against us by the terrorist, as the latest ISIS video talks about directly. And so what's the answer to that very complex question? There could be some knee-jerk legislative response, putting a backdoor into everybody's iPhone. I don't think that's the answer. The hackers, it would make it vulnerable to hackers as well. And you can imagine the public reaction to something like that. That's why I like the idea of a 9/11 style national commission. Senator Warner joined me on this to put the stakeholders, all relevant ones, both tech, the IC, federal, state, and local law enforcement, and privacy experts to mandate a national consensus and conversation to make recommendations in very short order, 6 months initially, to the Congress on how to resolve this. I think if Congress does nothing, and we do have an attack in the United States, which could happen, an active shooter or suicide bombing, through the use of encryption, because when I talked to the FBI director, that's their their biggest concerns. There are people in Raqqa today talking to people in the United States, and we don't have the ability to see it. And it's this encryption phenomenon that allows them to do that, and we have to find a solution to this.
And the heart of the problem, Eric, is you don't have any prospect through human intelligence of finding out whether they are so tight, small cells that ability to penetrate them is virtually non-existent. So you're almost totally, imagery won't tell you. So you're almost totally dependent on being able to access their communications to give any warning or preemption at all in the process. The young lady here had a question.
Hi, my name is Mrinalini Shah. I'm a Clements Center undergraduate fellow. Thank you so much for joining us. My question is sort of directed to Congressman Conaway. You mentioned, sort of reiterated the importance of trust, whether that's between agencies in Congress, congressional committees, and individual congressmen themselves. So my question is, what would be some reasons why you would vote not to provide a particular congressman or woman with intel he or she is requesting?
Well, first off, do they need it? Is it part of what they do, the committees they serve on? If they demonstrated an issue as to why that's important, that they know that, and it's not just some sort of voyeuristic excursion into sources and methods that they want to get access to. But mainly it's their personal conduct. We see each other on the floor, we see each other vote, we see the way that folks handle themselves, and in this particular instance, I'd seen this guy do something he shouldn't have done, and he's not to be trusted with state secrets. And those are hard decisions to make. My service on the Ethics Committee with Michael for 6 years. I was also here in Texas on the State Board of Accountancy for 7.5 years, sitting in judgment of my peers who had screwed something up and having to make those kind of hard decisions. It's very difficult to look your fellow member in the eye and say, hey, you screwed something up. So in this instance, and it doesn't happen very often, but in this instance, this guy had done something that, to me, made him untrustworthy. And you don't want somebody untrustworthy handling these secrets.
I also had the experience of members not going to the secure facility to read because they didn't want anything that would impact on the view they already had.
Amen.
In the process.
That is still relevant.
That's very
We're
true.
trying to do 702 briefings for everybody, anybody, because it's going to have to be reauthorized in the not too distant future, and we want members to understand what it currently is. And we're having a hard time getting members to come take that brief because they don't want to know. They're much more comfortable in the ignorance that they wallow in.
Yeah.
They don't want to know the real deal and then have to change their public position because they now know what it really is instead of the nonsense that permeates much of the airways.
But the Intelligence Authorization Bill is always made available to all
Yes.
members to read,
Including the classified annex.
Yeah.
I'm Bill Tremblay from Marble Falls in Meadow Lakes, Texas, which is on the south end of the city. But people around me are very concerned about Homeland Security, and I am too. This administration has chose not to enforce our immigration laws. And they want to know, and I want you to address, why you haven't made this administration enforce the laws that we have on the books now, send people back as far as deportation is concerned, process them, photograph them, fingerprint them, and make sure that will have a great effect on stopping that immigration over a period of time and increase our Homeland Security. Are we getting false information, or I'd like both of you to address that. Thank you.
Yeah, we've had numerous oversight hearings on my committee on not just the border itself and who's coming in, and we're obviously concerned about special interest aliens and potential terrorist threats, but just the immigration itself. We've had numerous oversight hearings. And the administration, we believe, went around the Congress that has the power under the Constitution to pass immigration laws when Secretary Johnson issued this executive action. We in the Congress, we just had a vote on this just recently, many of us have voiced our opposition to that, and it's played itself out in the courts. And it's now before the U.S. Supreme Court in terms of, is the executive branch overreaching its authority under the Constitution when it's really the Congress that has the power to do that. And so, we'll see. I think this has been sort of put into the courts now. There have been a lot of oversight hearings on this.
Well, let me, and Michael's correct in terms of that particular deal, but the legislative branch has the checks and balances against the executive branch only as it operates shoulder to shoulder with each other, the Senate and the House. And for the Harry Reid era, we've not been shoulder to shoulder with the Senate. And so there's nothing the House can do unilaterally to force the administration to do anything. Only Congress working together can try to do that. As I mentioned earlier in my conversation, it's a lot easier to stop things by cutting off funding than it is to force them to do their job. To pay you more money to make you do that, or take money away from you to make all those kinds. It's a frustration, and I hear it in your voice. And Trevor has had that conversation with me, sitting beside you there. Often.
Those are constituents, right?
Marble Falls used to be. Trevor currently is, but we don't have unilateral authority. The only unilateral authority the House has is to start tax bills. Everything else can start in the Senate, start in the House, but you have to have both of them working together to offset whatever it is the executive branch might do. And so much of the frustration you're talking about is just the inability of the legislative branch to stand up for itself. Harry Reid and the Senate Democrats and the House Democrats should have been as angry about the presidential overreach as Republicans in the House and the Senate are, because this is a constitutional issue. This is a territory, it's a turf battle, and the president's waded off into our turf, and Harry Reid is probably not supposed to get political in there, but beyond the pale on that now. But Harry Reid is a co-conspirator with everything the president did in terms of overreaching his authorities and dabbling into the areas that the legislative branch should have been done. But to force the executive branch to do something really hard to do, in the sense that it takes both houses to make that happen. And for until 15, we didn't have an ally in the Senate. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but it's the reality of it.
But the problem is made more complex when we don't, in fact, authorize where there is a need. I'm old enough to remember the Braceros program, where workers came in to work agriculture largely, seasonal. Their families stayed at home. They went back. Program was defeated largely because of union pressure in the process. So you end up with illegals coming to do those jobs. If you were listening to your news programs this morning, there was coverage of the current shortage of people willing to go work in agricultural jobs to bring them this year's harvest in the process. So it isn't just how do you get rid of people, how do you in fact enable people who are willing to take those jobs to help our economy grow And with that cheerless note, thanks so much our colleagues for coming, and thank you for the meeting.